Our title this evening, Satan's Final Effort to Deceive, it makes me think of the fact that Satan's been a deceiver all along. That's just his nature. What would lead us to believe that we may even now be into his final? Could we safely say that we're into that period where this is a final time and he's putting on this final deception?
I think that's so significant that's really number 19. How soon will the conflict be over? Are we really in the last days? And you know, you and I both had fathers who preached the nearness of the end. My father preached that for 55 years, and we're still here.
Yeah.
What's the reason for the delay? Are we now in this period?
Is it an encouraging sign, do you think, that our world does seem to be at least talking more about Satan than in the past? You have some of these black magic and even Satan worship, Church of Satan.
The Church of Satan even.
Is that something that we ought to feel good about, or?
They recently interviewed the leader of that church on television. It was something to watch and listen to.
What do you think that represents, though? Is the world in general becoming more alert to Satan's deception?
I think the fact that they're talking about him so much could not be interpreted to mean we're more ready, that we're more alert. It all depends what we're saying about him. This may all be part of his deception. If he could lead us to think of him as he is not, because he wants to come as Christ.
So it could figure into a very clever scheme. And
I think so. I think that's also part of his effort to deceive.
And one of the questions that comes up, and I've heard asked before, but I think it comes up again this evening, since Christ is not going to come till after this final effort to deceive on Satan's part, does Satan have some control about when the end comes? In other words, if Satan were to work a little harder and be a bit more successful, would that help to bring the second coming of Jesus? What part does he play in the timing here?
That seems like a terrible thing to say, but 2 Peter 3:12, and work to hasten on the coming of the day of God is really addressed to the adversary. I think as far as he's concerned, he'd like to bring it on immediately, but the Lord knows we're not ready, and so in mercy he waits, as Peter also says. And that's why next time our subject will be God waits for his children to grow up. If we were ready as Job was, God would allow these closing events to occur, but he's our Heavenly Father. So he waits.
So it really isn't that Satan has a controlling part and that they're kind of partners in this...
he's being restrained, is the picture in Thessalonians and elsewhere.
But that does bring up another question. You're saying he's being restrained, but then that implies that God is allowing, at least in some sense, for Satan to have this opportunity to deceive. How does that serve God's purposes in the great controversy?
Well, that's the question that's come up in various ways many times.
It's been asked again and again.
If he won the victory on Calvary, why not terminate right afterwards? Look what's happened these last 2,000 years and happening in the news this week. Everything God does speaks eloquently to his purposes, and so we ask the question, how does this? There are things yet to be demonstrated, not about God and his government. Satan has never been given an entirely free hand to run things his way. And we're going to see this. When the 7 angels pour out the 7 vials of God's wrath, we understand from Romans and Hosea and the cross that God's wrath is his giving people up, handing them over. The Spirit ceases to restrain. The 4 angels no longer hold the 4 winds of the final events, and Satan will have a free hand. And the universe and his own followers will see how he will run things when he can run it his own way, and all hell will break loose at that time.
So it really is a matter, again, of demonstration.
I think it demonstrates something else also. I wouldn't blame the angels for wondering if we rebels could really be convinced of the truth the way they are. They're all ready to see the 7 last plagues and not interpret them as vengeance. They're all prepared to see the wicked consumed and not be made afraid of God. They wonder if we are. And so they wonder, would it be possible for a group of us, really pygmy rebels that we are this far from the Garden of Eden, would it really be possible for the truth to heal us to the point that, like Job, we could pass through that awful time of trouble and not be led away from God, or be led to think of him as vengeful during the 7 last plagues, and so be ready too to see the destruction? See, one generation will be alive to see the Lord come. And that generation can really speak eloquently of God's power to heal, the power of the truth to restore the damage done. This last generation has a great privilege of bringing honor to God, who says, I can heal with the truth. I can actually restore those people. And believe me, just the way you angels do. So that'll be a high privilege.
I have the feeling that that may tie in very closely with next week and growing up and what that means.
That's right.
You referred to these mystery religions that seem to, I was fascinated by
incredible.
that. They seem to have so closely counterfeited things with which we're very familiar in the Christian faith. How popular were these religions?
They were very popular, both before Christ came and while he was here, and for some little time thereafter. So some of them counterfeited before Christ came, some counterfeited and confused the issues after he came. They were so popular that some people joined several of them, you know,
just to make
extra
sure.
Fire insurance, you see. It's like that altar to the unknown God in Athens. If one mystery religion was good, it might be the wrong God. Join all you can if you could afford to. One of my teachers at Chicago, and Dr. Walter Speck had him too, was Dr. Harold Rideout Willoughby, a real expert on the mystery religions. So we heard a lot about them. He wrote a long PhD dissertation on rebirth in paganism called Pagan Regeneration. It is so close, it's so much like the truth, and yet diabolically perverse. That's when I decided 40 years ago the devil really tried to counterfeit the first coming of Christ. He failed with some of us. With those same some, he'll be working in the end, and he's learned something. With his final ultimate cunning, he will counterfeit the second coming as far as he can.
So he had these counterfeits already in place?
In place.
Before Christ was born
Yes.
in Bethlehem?
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Now, you used the word mystery religion, and I've come across that in references, historical references, but it reminds me that didn't Paul himself speak of Christianity as great is the mystery of godliness, for example? Now, what's he doing there? Is Christianity a mystery religion?
I think he was using it on purpose. It's not just that God has kept it a secret. It's true he hasn't been able to reveal it all, but one of the major differences between the mystery religions and Christianity was this. When you were initiated into one of the mysteries, you were sworn never to tell anybody, whereas the Christian mystery was to be told to everybody. So he loved calling Christianity a mystery and then telling everybody everything about it. So we have a revealed mystery. And his hearers would probably understand that and be rather struck with the contrast. We have the most important information in the universe, and you might think we'd want to keep it secret. No, we want to tell everybody. Go and tell this mystery to the whole world.
What was the actual Greek word that was used, the same word?
Yeah, mysterion. Mystery comes from it.
But Paul's referring to it as something that we wouldn't have figured out on our own, but God's given it to us and we want to tell it everywhere.
We want to tell it. And the thing that would strike them most is that it's not a secret.
Whereas the others, it was
they
very
were
secretive
not allowed
sort of
to tell. It's amazing we know anything about them.
As you've talked about this matter of Satan's final effort to deceive, I wonder, do you expect that we're going to see devil worship before the end of time? Some of these blatant things that we tend to associate with other places of earth, more dark as far as knowledge and civilization and so on?
Yeah, I don't think so among especially among the Christian nations. These are the people he wants to deceive the most. He wants to be worshipped not as the devil. He wants to be worshipped as Christ. And so he masquerades as an angel of light. He will come in the end as an angel of light. And he will be worshipped in Revelation 13 as he wanted to be worshipped by the angels. He asked Jesus to get down on his knees and worship him. His great moment will be when the cry goes forth, Christ has come, and the world prostrates itself before him, except the few who will say, no, you not only have a devil, you are the devil. And you can see why it would go hard for them.
Well, in a way, then, that ties in what you said earlier. He really isn't anxious to be identified as Satan.
No.
He really wants to masquerade as Christ.
That's the deception. If he came with heads, with the horns and a tail, that wouldn't be any problem. He comes as the gracious Redeemer, the great medical missionary, and heals the diseases of the people, even appears to raise the dead. And these are the evidences so many people use to test their beliefs. He will so deceive us. Then we'll remember that maybe that discussion on the question of authority, the way he uses his authority and relies on miracles, will warn us, beware, he could be lying to us, as that older prophet did in 1 Kings 13.
Well, as you talk about it that way, that raises some very serious questions, I think. When, for instance, Peter in our Bible reference sheet admonishes us to resist Satan, how does one go about? How can one go about and be able to resist such a clever, intelligent, wily foe?
Seems to me we can only resist him with the truth. We will have to be so settled into the truth that we cannot be moved.
But I was wondering, would calling, for instance, on the help of angels, or if you were to sense the presence of Satan, I grew up hearing some stories that used to make me worried about the possibility of Satan perhaps doing something rather scary. Mm-hmm. And I came to the conclusion that if I said the name of Jesus, I think that was even suggested.
I've heard it
that
many times, as a matter of fact.
If you were to come up against Satan or felt that his presence was near, then the thing to do would be to say the name of Jesus several times. Mm-hmm. Even if you could just whisper it. I remember a story where the person was only able just to whisper the name, and that did it. Mm-hmm. What do you think of that? Is that a...
Well, if one is using the name for magic, then one had better be informed that Jesus never went by that name. Jesus is an English pronunciation of the Greek translation Jesus of his real name, Joshua. If you want to call him by his real name, it's Joshua, and I've never heard anybody doing that to scare the devil away. So I regret it very much when we use the name of that wonderful person as a good luck charm. I think it is an insult to him and does us a lot of damage. But I hear it all the time. We're always singing about those precious 2 syllables, Jesus, and he never went by that name. It's the person, not the name. But if we could remember Christ and call on him, that would be the only way to go.
But you could use the name at that point.
Oh, because we know who we mean by it.
Only because it referred to the person.
That's the thing. If I'm thinking of the real person when I say Jesus, even though that's an English pronunciation of the Greek translation.
He would understand that.
Of course he would, you see. But if I'm just using that name as a good luck charm, I might as well have garlic there to scare off the vampires and that sort of thing. Oh, I think that too is diabolical, to slip into using his name as magic.
All right. Well, following on with that line of thought and that question...
By the way, why would the devil be scared of the name? But he knows the power of the one. It's the person that counts, always the person.
Just the saying of the word.
That's right.
Would have no effect.
It's the person that counts.
Unless the person meant that much to us.
Yeah, and if Jesus were there, he certainly would flee. So I would want him there.
If the devil, though, could deceive brilliant angels, and we started out with that in our very first meeting, really, the war that began in heaven, what chance do we have to resist by ourselves?
Well, I have to go back and think of people in the Bible who did, and there's Job. And Job even called for help, and none seemed to come. And yet he survived.
Things seemed to get worse.
And things got worse, that's right. The more he called for help, the more things got worse. He says, God, I call and you never answer me. It was on our Bible text sheet last week. And yet Job did not let God down. This is extraordinary. Of course, God had brought him to that point. And I believe God wishes to bring us to the point where we can actually stand singly and alone. And the only restraint on the devil is you may not take his life. And Job survived. That's incredible. Did you notice Job bragging, though, when it was all over?
No.
Oh, he was humbled by it all, and he was hardly prepared for God saying, you did wonderfully, Job, wonderfully. When you thought you were doing so badly up here in heaven, I was saying, now there's a perfect man. But that's not conceit. Job was not conceited.
When you use the expression to stand singly and alone, Graham, you don't mean by that you're standing without God. You mean standing alone as far as other evidence, the presence of others, perhaps?
Well, Satan was given a free hand. You remember, Satan said, just let me get my hands on him and he'll curse you to your face. And so eventually he took everything away from Job. And the only thing Job had to help him, it appeared, were those theologians, and they were all wrong.
Miserable help.
And I might suggest that Satan's final effort to deceive may come most persuasively through caring theologians. Now, how can we beware?
That makes one wonder whether he wants to be a theologian.
Now, Job was certainly protected in the extent that Satan could not kill him.
But he had to trust in the truth.
It was the truth.
And even Job was growing in an understanding of what that truth
even
was.
at the time. I can't help but use Ellen White's magnificent words of this. She says, to be like Job is to be so settled into the truth, both intellectually and spiritually, that one cannot be moved. Now, the Spirit brought him there, the truth brought him there, his conversations with God brought him there. It was all the doing of God, except that Job always said yes to God. And if you say yes to God long enough, the heavenly physician can heal us and bring us to the place where Job was.
Now, our Bible reference sheet is very encouraging because it really does appear that there are some saints who are going to succeed.
That's right.
And we could be among them if we understand
That's right.
The truth. But here in Revelation 12:17, it speaks about those who have the testimony of Jesus. That's the phrase is a bit different in this translation, but I remember that phrase from years back.
Yeah.
What is this testimony of Jesus that the saints will have?
Well, it can be translated, they bear witness to him in some versions. But take it either way. These are people who hold fast to Jesus' testimony about his Father as true. In other words, they believe what Jesus said about his Father as true. They accept his testimony. Or if they bear witness to Jesus, that means they do bear witness. They believe in him, and it's their privilege and pleasure to go and bear witness to him, the one who brought the truth. So either way, and not to get into the technicalities of the Greek, it's 50-50 either way, and whichever way you take it, it makes sense.
Well, is that same thing true when we come to Revelation 14:12? Now, that's not on our reference sheet, but that's a very familiar verse. It speaks about those who have keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus.
Of Jesus, which in some versions reads faith in Jesus or remain loyal to Jesus. The Greek technical point is exactly the same. It could go either way, but which would be better? To have a faith in God as Jesus had, or to have faith in Jesus as bringing the truth about the Father. Have either one, you're going to arrive at the same place.
Probably need both.
You need both. So right. I'd like to translate it both ways.
You've spoken about Satan not coming with forked tail and hooves and a pitchfork, but masquerading as an angel of light. That raises the question, if he comes that way, and certainly the Bible pictures that scene, how are we going to recognize in them? You mentioned these little things that we might have tucked away that we think are going to work for sure. He's going to be cleverer than that, I have the uneasy feeling. How will we recognize when, for example, as Revelation describes the whole world, all except for a handful apparently, and not a very large group, the whole world is going to be worshiping him. What are the best ways?
I think it has to be the one central issue in the great controversy. It's the question of authority. The way God exercises his authority so as to have peace and freedom throughout the universe. Satan cannot counterfeit that. That's the one thing he cannot do. I mean, if he uses God's method, he'll lose. If he says, you may investigate me, inquire, ask for evidence, that's God's way of exercising authority. If we start investigating the devil, he loses. Like Jim Jones, people went to investigate, he lost. The devil will not invite our inquiry or he loses. And at that point, when we see how he exercises authority, being convinced of the rightness of God's way of exercising authority, we will perceive that he is the adversary.
Then you're saying that it is not a matter of how well he can perform things that dazzle and catch our attention.
That he can do easily.
He can do that superbly.
Yes.
But we're going to have to see behind that to what is the real meaning here, what are the concepts, and how does he go about it?
See, this could deceive the very elect if possible. It's not possible because they're so settled into the truth of God's way of running the universe, they perceive the falsity of his way.
In our Bible reference sheet, there's a reference to Revelation 13, and that raises the question about the beast and the mark of the beast, which we touched on last week. The question has come up, do you think that any have the mark of the beast now? Do you want to touch on that? Or
that depends on what the mark of the beast is. And I think that the best way to understand the mark of the beast is to consider first the seal of God. And that would come up next time very readily.
All right.
So we really will consider what it means to be settled into the truth.
I want to come to something that you touched on a bit as you came to the conclusion of your presentation. how could it be that Christians could allow the adversary to deceive us regarding the very truths that we hold? For example, what could he possibly do to faith, to distort it, to bend it, to where it would be a deception rather than truth?
If he could lead, as he already has, people to understand that faith is religious conviction for which you do not need evidence, then he's got us totally vulnerable to his position because the evidence isn't with him. And I believe he's done that. He's led Christians to say that the wonderful thing about faith is you believe it without evidence, without inquiry, without investigation. And so he's turned faith into a vulnerability, a willingness to believe without evidence. He's turned it into a virtue, and he set us all up to be deceived. And yet how widely that's held. And next time I'd like to maybe touch on more of these.
What about the matter of sin?
To suggest that sin is the violation of an arbitrary command, you know. He can use sin, the misunderstanding of sin, to support his charges that God is arbitrary.
Well, some of these other things that you referred to in our reference sheet, such as the atonement, for example, and the cross.
Particularly on the atonement, that Christ died to reconcile the Father to us. This is widely held by Christians. Or he died to assuage the Father's wrath. Here you have a God, you see, who is vengeful, unforgiving, and severe. You don't have the picture that Jesus brought, who had to die to persuade Christ, and yet he's God. Who had to die to win Christ to our side, yet he said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So a very widely held Christian view could be used to support the devil's charges.
What about some of the other things that you mentioned here, the law?
Yeah, if the law is seen as an arbitrary test of our obedience, you know, like the Sabbath is an arbitrary test of our obedience. By the very word, you're saying God is arbitrary. But then we try to sanctify that by saying, well, he's sovereign. So when he is arbitrary, he really isn't, because he has a right to be so. And my mind begins to go around and around when I hear that kind of talk. It isn't logical to talk that way. But the trouble is that religion doesn't have to be logical. And when we say that, the religion doesn't have to be reasonable, doesn't have to be logical. Into whose hands are we playing?
Just believe, have
Just
faith,
believe,
and
you see.
we're
Since
trapped.
the truth is not on his side, he has to do this to all these doctrines. But he has us still saying we're Christians.
What do you see him doing with something like the word judgment, or the idea of the judgment?
Oh, think how fearsome that can be. Or the suggestion that the Father's not as gracious as the Son during the judgment. He hears us saying, we have a friend in court, don't be afraid. And who's the friend? And we all say, Jesus, and the devil smiles. And you mean the Father's not our friend? Father's just as friendly as the Son.
Well, that leads over to the whole idea of Christ's intercession.
Yes, the thought that the Son has to plead with the Father to forgive us. I remember the words of my daughter when she was only 6. Does that mean God doesn't love us as much as Jesus does? May we encourage our children to raise those questions, and raise them soon, because they too have to pass through this experience. Jesus said, there is no need for me to intercede with the Father for you, for the Father loves you himself. That's the plainest testimony of Jesus in the whole Bible. We say we accept the testimony of Jesus, and then picture him pleading with the Father. The devil must smile when we do this.
He's been astoundingly successful, it seems to me, Graham, in distorting that. For example,
the most gracious things about God, he's twisted to his advantage.
That's true.
Yeah.
Now, for example, last week when we were talking about God's last call to awaken his people in the three angels' messages, what about that matter of the destruction of the wicked? He's done a number with that one as well.
Yes. Now, he manages to cover this by keeping us from discussing religion in simple language. So we use euphemisms and sanctified phrases so it doesn't sound too bad. But the truth of the common position is that God has said to his children, you either love me or I will slowly torture you in the fire for eternity. Now do you love me? The devil must smile when he hears us say that. It's the most diabolical thing he's ever perpetrated on the human race. And even if we say, no, he won't burn you forever, he'll only burn you as long as you deserve, he's still smiling. But just stop to think of what that means. Our Heavenly Father says, children, all I want is your love, because I want peace and freedom up here. But if you don't love me, I'll burn you as long as you deserve. Now, I hope I didn't make you scared. It doesn't make sense, and religion preeminently must make sense. Truth makes sense.
But when you say it makes sense, is there nothing about it that goes beyond my understanding that still calls me forward to?
It makes sense that the one who created this whole vast universe is way beyond my understanding, but I understand him enough to trust him. I understand him enough to know he'd never say, look, you either love me or I'll kill you. If he said that, that would make no elementary sense. It makes no sense to a little child. But we say, well, religion doesn't have to make sense. His thoughts are not like ours. His thoughts are at least as good as ours.
Now, last week when we were talking about the three angels' messages, I think you spent about 90% of the time
That's true.
talking about the good news part.
Yes.
And I was wondering, shouldn't we have divided the time equally between all three?
In thirds.
Why such overemphasis upon that first part?
I think there's a great message there. I think we need to know the everlasting good news before we even look at the other two. You've got to know the truth about our God before you can understand the opposition or you can understand the awful consequence. The truth is our protection there. And I believe we should go to the world always with the three angels' messages and always start with number one. Never start with number three.
And understand the other two in the light of number one.
In the light of number one. So 90% number one.
All right. Now, next Friday evening, in our number 18, our topic will be...
God waits for his children to grow up, and we need to. In mercy, he waits. Of course he would.
So we invite you to be sure to be here next Friday evening, all of you, for this next step in this important sequence of truth that we're examining together.